Hello, I hope you're all doing really well. Today I will be talking about the books that I read in July. First up, I finally read Normal People by Sally Rooney. I was very pleased to find I'm of the camp who absolutely loved this book. I read Conversations with Friends a couple of months ago, and interestingly, although I felt like I connected a bit more to that book in terms of I really enjoyed being inside the head of the protagonist Frances, and I felt that I connected less with Marion and Connell in Normal People, I had to give Normal People a rare 5 stars from me because it was just one of those books that you don't read, you just swallow whole. There is something about Sally Rooney's writing that reads more like a film than it does a novel. I think it's because she is so intricate in the way she describes character, and it is so easy to visualize and understand Marion and Connell. I've watched a couple of long interviews with Sally Rooney talking about her process in writing the novel, and she talks a lot about how she comes up with these characters and then in the process of writing the novel just thinks about what situation she could put them in and works out, I guess, almost logically what they would do and what they would say in those situations. And I think that really comes across when you're reading it. I was so completely inside these characters' heads for the few days that I read it that it felt so weird when I finished the book to not be able to find out what happens next. I think a thing that helped me relate in some ways to the book, not so much to the characters and what happens to them, but the sort of school and university situation that they're in, is that these characters are going to university during the exact same years that I went to uni, and I really recognized a lot of the people that I met at university in the characters that surround Marion and Connell. One thing that did kind of strike me was the lack of technology in the book. The only technology the characters really use are text messages and emails. I think such a big part of my university experience was discovering things like Instagram and Facebook. Having not had access to them when I was in high school, it did feel like that was missing from the experiences of these characters, but in a way that probably gives the novel more timelessness. It's one of those books I'm going to have to read again because I read it so fast. I feel like there's so much more in it that I could probably get a bit more depth on a second read. I know there's a TV adaptation being written by Sally Rooney that is filming, I think, currently, and I'm very curious to see what that is like because the book itself is so filmic and yet also so much inside the characters' heads, so it's going to be really interesting to see how they adapt it. Next, I read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. I somehow missed out on reading any Judy Blume books when I was a kid, but I've always known of this book as being an incredibly famous middle grade fiction book, and there's a film adaptation being made, so I was really curious to actually read it. I sort of thought this might be like the Anastasia Krupnik books that I was obsessed with when I was a kid, but it was not. I found this an incredibly dreary, badly written book. Basically, it's about a girl called Margaret who moves from New York to the suburbs, and her first year of school in this new place, she makes friends with 3 girls who are constantly talking about how they want to get their periods. That was probably the point where I disconnected from this book because I don't understand how you get to that point as a child where you want your period to come. They're also constantly talking about how they hope that their boobs grow, and it made me super uncomfortable because these children are obviously getting really bad messages that like the most important thing a little girl can think about is how big her boobs are going to get. The book is also about the fact that Margaret has a Jewish grandmother on her father's side and Christian parents on her mother's side, and she herself is not of either religion, so she's trying to decide if she should pick a religion or not. But even for a kid's book, it never really went that deep into that idea. I can't imagine how they're going to adapt this book, so I imagine they're going to change a lot of things and maybe they'll make an interesting story out of it. Next, I read Where Angels Fear to Tread by Ian Forster. This is Ian Forster's first published novel, and you can definitely tell it was kind of interesting to see his trademark sort of characters and sardonic kind of writing style appear alongside a very clunky plot and some kind of strange discussion on the differences between Italian people and English people. The book starts off with she's basically the sister-in-law of this family, so she married one of the sons in this fairly well-off family from a country British town, and they don't really like this woman. They consider her quite uncouth, so they've persuaded her to go on a trip to Italy to hopefully broaden her mind a bit. But unfortunately in Italy she falls in love with an Italian man, the son of a dentist, and puts the family in disgrace by marrying him, and then a whole bunch of other stuff happens concerning her child. I think the main problem I had with really getting into this book is that there are no likable characters at all, really. Everyone's kind of a bit bland. Mostly I couldn't really quite see what the point of the novel was or what point Ian Forster was trying to make, unless it was just simply to showcase the ridiculousness of people in various aspects of society. I only have 2 Ian Forsters left to read, The Longest Journey and Morris, so I'm hoping I'll enjoy at least one of those. At the moment it's looking like a A Room with a View and Howard's End are still the two favourites and the two best ones that I would recommend people to read. Next, I read Severance by Ling Ma. This book was not quite what I was expecting. It's kind of been billed as this dystopian story about a woman in New York who, even though the world is ending around her, continues to go to work. The book is not nearly as linear as that, and in fact that aspect of the story doesn't really happen until the last part of the novel. So it starts off where the world has ended and the protagonist Candace has joined a group of people who have survived this fever, and so they are roaming about the countryside trying to survive. But an equal amount of the book is spent on before the fever happened, talking about Candace's family, about her parents emigrating from China, about how she moved to New York and got a job working in a publishing house as part of the Bible publishing division, and about her relationship with her boyfriend. I really enjoyed this book. The discrepancy in tones between the after fever section and the before fever section could have been really disconcerting, but I kind of liked being able to jump between the two because it offered a nice change from each section. The bits before the fever really felt like the type of novels similar to My Year of Rest and Relaxation, about young women living in New York who are struggling with being adults, while the after fever section felt almost quite different in tone and was very much in the dystopian fiction genre. I think the character of Candace really holds the book together. I really enjoyed being inside her head, and the book has a lot of really interesting things to say about cultural differences between the West and the East, and also I guess about being a young person and growing up and realizing that the dreams that your parents have for you aren't necessarily going to be realized. I enjoyed it and I would recommend it if it sounds interesting to you. Lastly, I read Zac and Mia by AJ Betts. AJ Betts is a local Perth author, and this book actually won Text Publishing's prize for children and young adult fiction. I believe AJ Betts actually works in cancer wards, and so a lot of this book is based on her observations of working there. So it starts off from the point of view of Zac, who is in hospital recovering from a bone marrow transplant that hopefully has got rid of the cancer in his body, and he gets a new neighbor called Mia, who is a girl around his age, and because he's in isolation they become friends without ever actually meeting, at least at first. This was a very well written young adult book. It had that real young adult feel of an adult author writing like teenagers. It gave a real insight into the different ways that people can react to being diagnosed with cancer. I thought it did a really good job of integrating pop culture references and technology as well, and was also really firmly set in Perth, which I obviously enjoyed a lot. The characters of Zac and Mia felt very real, and obviously a romance springs up between them that did feel quite natural as well. There's an obvious comparison with The Fault in Our Stars. It's definitely not as sad, but I would say this is an equally as engaging book. So that's everything I read in July. If you've read any of those books, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you soon. Bye!